Catherine Greig from Make Good is up next. Again, I've known Catherine for rather a long time, back in the days where she was managing the Waterloo Millennium Green. I have to tell this little anecdote. Catherine often signs off her emails with sunny wishes, and is slightly tricky community in Waterloo sometimes to handle, and once infamously got a response from an angry resident who signed off with stormy wishes in return. Catherine launched Make Good in 2009 to bring together her architectural qualifications and her interest in people-centred design. After her studies, she felt there was more to architecture than just creating more physical stuff. And she focuses on working collaboratively with communities around places undergoing change and engaging with the people, the residents, who arguably know the place best to have meaningful influence over what happens. Catherine, over to you.
Okay, so all of our work is based on the premise of collaborating with communities and making sure that we get a really local perspective on what's wanted. And that means that from winning a work perspective, it has to be something that the client buys into as well, because collaborations don't work if you don't have those base values that are the same. So it doesn't matter if they don't want it, just don't come to us, because it won't happen. So in terms of collaborating with communities, that might mean running workshops and looking at, well, what needs to happen. It might be looking at what a particular set of outputs could be, or it might be the outputs are set, but let's figure out how we can create content collaboratively for what that output might be and what it might look like, so it feels relevant to local people. It very often means spending time in a place, making sure that we're there, we're just talking to people, we're working with really hands-on materials, we're not under a gazebo with clipboards, so you can engage with children and young people, often very, never get involved in built environment stuff, but we're just there and present and able to have conversations about stuff. It means working with local businesses, particularly small businesses, understanding what is unique to them and understanding what matters to them about their neighbourhood, what's working, what's not working. And most of our projects probably involve collaborating across all of those sets of community members and groups, otherwise it just doesn't work and we don't create the right output. So we collaborate a lot with different disciplines. We're a small practice. This project is just out here. We collaborated with Michael Grubb's studio, a lighting designer. I know nothing about projectors. I know nothing about light levels. I know nothing about what happens if you put loads of projectors in a tunnel and there's cars going through. They know lots about that. But I do know about working with people around an area and thinking, well, how does this feel relevant to them, and making sure that the output at the end is something that they can, this person's physically holding the work that they produce, and then you can see the larger version projected so that you can actually see, hey, I made that thing happen and I can see where my influence was, and that's really important. But without both of us, we wouldn't have got that project, because it needed both things to make it sing. We collaborate with larger practices quite a lot, so we do a lot of projects that are regeneration-based, where we're not building the larger scheme, but we're doing the engagement work and we're creating pockets of meanwhile space within that. So it might be gardens, it might be exhibition spaces, it might be community spaces, and we look at how those are programmed. We wouldn't get that work if we weren't working with bigger firms. Collaborating with other visual artists, so our work sits very much between kind of art and architecture. This piece of work we collaborated with a sign writer, because it wouldn't have been possible to produce it. I was not going to go up there myself and kind of artwork that. They had the technical ability and knowledge of, like, how do we artwork something that sits well in that context. We collaborate a lot with fabricators, because actually we've found that increasingly we get commissions where we are both the designers and kind of project managing the budget, so we get the whole budget. So it's our risk, so we can design something elaborate and spend all the money on getting it built, and then we make no money and therein and Make Good. So we have to be very good at working with different fabricators. It might mean that we're working across timber or metal or loads of different materials, but we're trying to build a catalogue of fabricators that we work with regularly, so that, all jokes aside, we understand that finance, and we know that when we're proposing something, there's money in it for us and there's money in it for them, because you have to make both those things work. It means that often we're pitching in a very different way. So this project we did a long time ago, but we pitched against lots of visual artists to kind of do artwork for this school gate, and we were pitching against people who were going to hand paint it, and we said, we're going to work with a fabricator, we're going to use vitreous enamel, you're going to get a much better finish. Yes, it's more expensive, but you're going to get something that lasts a lot longer. You can't hand paint this. Sometimes we don't know who we're going to be collaborating with, but we can pitch with a whole suite of kind of, we can do the engagement, we can develop this design work, and actually we've got a network of people that we work with regularly, that we will find to fabricate whatever it is. So rather than going and saying we work with this material, we have to collaborate with contractors if we're scaling that up. So it was learning from the fabricators. We thought, hold on a minute, if we're going to do kind of landscape projects, I don't have the liability or the expertise to kind of take on doing a playground or a big landscape scheme, but contractors do. So they're not the kind of necessarily your traditional contractors, but they're people who also have the cash flow to make sure that if you're being paid to do a piece of work that's design and build, that you're going to get paid most of that build stuff at the end. And we can't carry that cash flow risk, but they can. So it's a kind of a really important way. And we can bring the kind of quirk and the kind of a little bit of flair and difference. So we're thinking a lot at the moment about how we can collaborate with contractors as we're doing more kind of 3D work, more kind of architectural type stuff. That what is the scale of contractor that we want to collaborate with, so that again we're not spending all of this budget on them and coming away with a tiny piece, that because I've got to pay people and I can't make that work. And then sometimes it works on the flip. So sometimes contractors come to us and say, we know we're pitching against a group of people who were all pretty much the same. I mean, but you could bring a little bit of an extra or something that kind of is interesting and sets us apart. So we're kind of on the other side of that collaboration, where we're coming in and bringing something that could turn a very ordinary pavement into something different. So something that we're really excited about at the moment is the capacity to collaborate with commissioners, particularly kind of local authority commissioners. So my colleague told me, I have to tell you, this isn't our scheme, this is a site. But often, like on really large scale projects, it's very common that the client would say, well, come and meet us and we'll do a walk around. So when people phone us and say, we're going to invite 3 companies or 4 companies, I often say, well, can we meet you? Can you show us around the space? Can you show us the site? Obviously, they're going to meet everybody, so it benefits all of the teams. But it means that we get to hear firsthand what their priorities are, what their concerns are, where this budget is coming from, what makes that project successful, what it has to achieve. And in this particular project on Whitechapel Road, we were standing at this crossing and the client was talking about, well, we want something that kind of deals with this side of the road and that side of the road and this side of the road and that side of the road. And we're thinking about lamp columns along here that links them. And you're like, why don't you do something here? So when we were pitching for the work, it meant that we could kind of really focus on things that would have impact for them. So we said, right, well, why don't we do something here? Like, if it's radical, right? So if you want to link 2 sides of the road, there's this crazy thing called a crossing. But it already existed, it's something but they hadn't thought about it, and we wouldn't have known from their brief, because their brief said, we want lamp column banners, that's what we want. So, and it stopped.